This is Surfing Through Cinema. I'm your host, Hawaii Harry. Today, I'll be discussing the next film, or in this case, TV series, for Star Wars Week. Starring Pedro Pascal and exclusively streaming on Disney Plus, this episode is all about The Mandalorian Seasons 1 and 2. Okay, so rather than talk about technical details, I'll just get right into the plot of each episode of The Mandalorian thus far. And, considering how it's a continual series, I'll eventually come back to it maybe in a year or two, discuss more about the other seasons. But for now, I'll discuss seasons 1 and 2, and I'll review the plot for each episode. All right, so the first episode, the whole series, is called The Mandalorian. And in this episode, the Mandalorian, he's asked by the client, played by Werner Herzog, to retrieve an asset, which turns out to be Baby Yoda, and to bring it back to him. And so the Mandalorian, he's a bounty hunter that collects different bounties and whatnot, and he's kind of in it for himself to collect money. And he finds Baby Yoda. In the process, though, there are other bounty hunters he has to fight off, including an IG droid that's trying to kill Grogu. And that's where the episode ends, kind of at a standoff with him shooting all these other troopers and everyone else trying to take the baby. All right, then the second episode is called The Child. So the Mandalorian gets parts to his ship stolen, and so he has to go out and fight Jawas to get some parts back so he can build it back up and take the baby back to his client, and he's able to do so. And then the third episode, called The Sin, Mando is awarded with Beskar, which is a highly durable material, and he gives the Baby Yoda over to the client. But as he learns, he just can't bear the fact that he left a baby with the Empire, essentially. And so he goes back and he rescues Baby Yoda. And in the process, he gets into a gunfight with many people, including Grief Karga, played by Carl Weathers. But then his friends, the other Mandalorians, come out and help him escape the planet. And he's able to escape with a lot of damage to his ship. And so the fourth episode, called The Sanctuary, Mando finds a planet for refuge, and he helps the village defeat local thugs who've taken over an ATST. And in this episode, we're introduced to Cara Dune, who's a former rebel soldier. Now she's kind of living in peace times, but they're able to defeat these renegades and able to destroy the ATST. And the Mandalorian is able to repair his ship, be able to fly out of there. And then in the next episode, once again, Mandalorian's ship is damaged, and he lands on the planet Tatooine to find some parts to fix the ship. And in the process, he runs into some bounty hunters, and he realizes that there's now a huge bounty on him and on Baby Yoda. And so he has to find a way to defeat these bounty hunters to get out of there. And one of the bounty hunters, played by Ming-Na Wen, she's able to she's defeated and killed by the other bounty hunter, and who the Mandalorian teams up with. And he's kind of an annoying, cocky young guy, and Mandalorian just absolutely hates him. And so they're able to fix his ship, and he leaves there. And the next episode, episode 6, is called The Prisoner. And in this one, the Mandalorian takes on another job, since he's trying to make money and survive. And he's asked to go with a group of these these other bounty hunters to rescue one of their own that's trapped in a prison ship. And but in the process, they kind of double cross the Mandalorian to try and steal the child, and they lock him up in the prison. But he's able to escape, and he's able to take the child out of there, and he ends up blowing up the prison ship. And then in the next episode, episode 7, called The Reckoning, Mandalorian receives a message from Grief Karga, who, played by Carl Weathers, was one of his enemies, now he's asking for the Mandalorian's help because the Empire has brought in more troops because they found out that the client, played by Werner Herzog, doesn't have the child. And so they're bringing in the Empire to basically burn it down and take over the town until the Mandalorian shows up to bring the child back. And so he goes and he teams up with Grief to fight the stormtroopers and all of that, as well as Cara Dune. And then they're cornered in the small room, and then they encounter Moff Gideon, who's the real bad guy of the whole series, played by Giancarlo Esposito. And then episode 8 is called Redemption. And the Mandalorian and his allies, they fight Moff Gideon and his stormtroopers, and they narrowly escape the building through a small entrance. And on the other side of this cave that they find, Moff Gideon finds them there in a TIE fighter. And so the Mandalorian fights him. They're able to square off with each other, and they shoot down the TIE fighter. And then the episode ends with Moff Gideon using a dark saber, cutting himself out of the TIE fighter. And that's the last shot of the whole season, and making us realize he's the big bad guy. He's the one the Mandalorian is fighting. Okay, so that was all of season 1. Now we're going to get into season 2 of The Mandalorian. So the first episode is called The Marshal. And in this episode, the Mandalorian is told that there's another Mandalorian on Tatooine, and because he's trying to return Baby Yoda back to his kind, and he learns there's a Mandalorian that can help him do so. So he lands on the planet, and he encounters not a Mandalorian, but a sheriff, or I guess a marshal, who's wearing Mandalorian armor to kind of protect himself. And he has a struggle in his town where there's a giant dragon that's coming through and eating all their crops and killing people. So he needs the Mandalorian's help to take down this dragon. And they also team up with the Sand People, Tusken Raiders, much to the dismay of the people because they've been fighting with the Sand People for years. But they're able to unify and take down the dragon together, and all due to the help of the Mandalorian. So that's the first episode. So the second episode is called The Passenger, and Mandalorian learns that there's another Mandalorian on a different planet, but in order for him to get to this different planet, he has to bring another person along with him, a frog lady, in exchange to information about this Mandalorian. So he does so, and they crash land on an ice planet, which is full of crazy spiders and stuff. They're also being chased by New Republic soldiers. So it's a crazy, chaotic episode full of just jump scares and crazy stuff going on. But they're able to escape, and they're able to move on to this other planet. And that brings up the next episode called The Heiress. And Mandalorian, he teams up with other Mandalorians to find Moff Gideon. So he encounters this Mandalorian. It turns out to be Bo-Katan, and who's from the Clone Wars. And and she wants to find Moff Gideon because Moff Gideon stole her Darksaber. And the Darksaber is what the true ruler of Mandalore uses. So she's trying to find him to get that back from him. And Mandalorian agrees to help him out. Mandalorian agrees to help them out in exchange for them giving him guidance on where to return Baby Yoda, because he wants to return him back to his kind. And they're able to find a ship that has information about where Moff Gideon is. Bo-Katan tells Mandalorian where he can find a Jedi, which is what Baby Yoda is. And that's where that episode ends. The next episode, called The Siege, once again, Mandalorian is seeking repairs, and he goes down to the planet with Grief on it, played by Carl Weathers again. And so while he meets up with Grief again, he needs to help them take down an Imperial base that is building a weapon of sorts. So they do so, and they find out that the Empire has been making clones. And so now they have that information. And then they guide the Mandalorian to a specific planet with a known Jedi on it. So now he has information on where to take Baby Yoda into a specific planet. In the next episode called The Jedi, the Mandalorian goes to this planet and he finds the Jedi Ahsoka Tano. And on this planet, she is kind of she's fighting against these tyrannical leaders who've taken over this village, and she requires Mandalorian's help in doing so. And they take down the village together and help each other out. And she reveals to him, although she was a Jedi at one point, she's not anymore. But she does tell him of a Jedi temple he could take Baby Yoda to. And if Baby Yoda and Baby Yoda uses the Force, will have to use the Force there to call another Jedi to come and take him. And so, the next episode called The Tragedy, the Mandalorian travels to this ancient Jedi temple, and while he's there, he gets ambushed by a couple bounty hunters, and it turns out it's Boba Fett, and also Ming-Na Wen's character from season 1. Turns out she didn't die. She was taken in by Boba Fett and fixed up. While they're fighting with each other, the Empire comes down and starts attacking them, and some droids come and they take Baby Yoda. And Mandalorian is too late to try and get them. Their armor is hard to pierce. You can't shoot them down. And they take Baby Yoda onto Moff Gideon's ship, which then goes into hyperdrive. So the next episode is called The Believer. So the Mandalorian needs the help of Cara Dune and Migs, maybe, to find Moff Gideon and the ship that he's on, because they're unable to track him down. And Migs Mayfield, played by Bill Burr, who is a character in season 1, he used to be a former sniper for the Empire, and so he knows of a place where you can track down all the Imperial ships. So they fly to this planet, they disguise themselves as stormtroopers, and they get themselves in there, and Miggs runs into one of his former superior officers, who then starts talking about the horrors that the Empire has done, and out of rage, Miggs kills him, and then there's constant firefight now, all kinds of shooting and everything, and he and the Mandalorian barely escape, and they blow up the base that the Empire was at. And before they do so, they track down Moff Gideon's ship and where he's headed. And so then in the next episode called The Rescue, the Mandalorian and gang, so including Boba Fett, Bo-Katan, Cara Dune, and others, they find and storm down Moff Gideon's ship. They defeat all the troopers and all of that, but then these droids from earlier who had indestructible armor, you couldn't shoot it down. They have hundreds of them come out and start attacking them, and then they're blockaded in a room with Moff Gideon, who the Mandalorian was able to defeat. And when they think all hope is lost, all of a sudden they see an X-Wing fighter come in, and it lands inside the hangar bay, and it's a Jedi. He comes up the elevator, turns on his lightsaber, and he kills all these droids. And he opens the door, he pulls off his hood, and it's revealed to be Luke Skywalker, who received the signal that that Baby Yoda was giving off earlier in the season in a tragedy episode. The Mandalorian, he gives Baby Yoda over to him to be trained to be a Jedi, and then that's where the season ends. And then they give kind of a nice end credit scene where it cuts back to Tatooine with Jabba's palace, and we see that Bib Fortuna from episode 6 of Star Wars, he's taken over Jabba's palace. He's a big fat guy now. All of a sudden we see Boba Fett storm into the room, and Bib Fortuna is freaking out. He's like, I thought you were dead. And then Boba Fett shoots him and gets onto Jabba's throne, and then it ends there, and then it comes up with a title card that says The Book of Boba Fett, revealing that this is another spin-off series from The Mandalorian. All right, so that's The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2. I'm going to go on a break real quick, but first, here's a message from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Here's how. It's totally free.
There are tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer and even your cell phone. But that's not all. Anchor distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You could even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a complete podcast all in one small place. So go on and download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.
Okay, so we're back from our break. Now I'm going to get into some critical views and my personal views on The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2. Okay, so season 1 has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, and season 2 has a 94%. So this is a very, very popular show, and it's the number 3 most streamed show on any streaming service in the entire world. So Disney definitely put in the correct amount of work and amount of effort to make this show very enjoyable, very nice to watch. But on top of that, it's definitely the most popular show you can watch on Disney Plus. A lot of people, the only incentive they really have to even have Disney Plus is to watch Mandalorian. And then IMDb. So the highest rated episode is the rescue episode, so chapter 16. And the reason being, Luke Skywalker shows up. All this really cool stuff happens in it. And then the lowest rated episode is chapter 5, the Gunslinger. This is one where Mandalorian encounters other bounty hunters on Tatooine. They state the reasoning is because the person he's trying to work with, the bounty hunter the Mandalorian is working with, he is not a likable character, very annoying, and it wasn't that interesting of an episode. So those are the critical views on it. Across the board, very, very popular show. Some say it's saved the Star Wars saga. And so that leads into my personal views. I absolutely love this show. I think it's definitely the best show on Disney Plus. Although I have started watching WandaVision, but we've only had 2 episodes so far, so we'll see. But this is definitely the best Star Wars thing right now. And honestly, I really think it's better than the sequel trilogy. I think those are pretty disappointing. But maybe once I view them again, maybe I'll have a different opinion. But this is definitely the best thing Disney has done because, yeah, they have some characters that are familiar, but they weren't major characters. Luke Skywalker, sure, he shows up, but it's for like maybe a minute. But we have whole episodes dedicated to some minor characters that are now kind of more popular, like Bo-Katan and Ahsoka Tano. Well, Boba Fett, he was kind of already popular, but it was really cool to see him actually have dialogue, to see him in action. I think that's a really good idea that they bring in new characters for us to learn to love and enjoy, especially like Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian himself, but also to bring some minor characters more into the spotlight. I think that's a great approach that Disney is doing, and I'm excited to see all these other shows they're going to add to Disney Plus. Speaking of that, I know I'll be finishing up Star Wars Week pretty soon, so I probably won't visit those for a couple of years, honestly, because, well, they're not out yet, and with COVID and everything, we have no idea when any of these things are coming out. So I'll just keep going the way it is right now. I may revisit Mandalorian and all of that later on, but in the meantime, I'll just stick to these 2 seasons. And yeah, I absolutely love this show. Now, season 2, it did seem it had a lot more filler episodes, but honestly, I think it was fine. Like, it built up all the correct tension. I think it was a great use of getting to know characters, pacing the storyline. And I think the real reason why people say this one in particular has a lot of filler episodes, because a lot of fans of Star Wars aren't used to TV shows. Because TV shows, you need to have a building point to build up to a specific climax. So you need to have a rising action. In a movie, that's like a couple scenes. But for a TV show, especially one like this one, you need a couple episodes to be the rising action. So I think they're doing great. I think it's definitely one of the better shows on TV right now. and one of my favorites. All right, but those are my thoughts and feelings on The Mandalorian. Next time, I'll be discussing the next film for Disney Week. This is a movie based off the plays and books by J.N. Barrie, with which is the story of a boy from Neverland, where no one grows up. I'm, of course, talking about Peter Pan. All right, well, until next time, this has been Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Surfing Through Cinema. Make sure to check us out on Facebook at Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry and on Instagram with Surfing Through Cinema. We also have a website, www.anchor.fm/Surfing Through Cinema, where you can learn more details on upcoming episodes and on past episodes.